now.
All right. Okay, guys, what we're going to do is just discuss a little bit more of the categories. How it started off is we said that there are 4 categories in the Mishnah. I'd like to call them main categories instead of primary categories because I didn't want to confuse it with the primary categories of ox. In other words, there are different levels of primary category. Your first primary categories, of which there are 4, are mentioned in the Mishnah. And that is ox, hashor, pit, habor, mave, which the Gemara is going to go into a few dafim to explain what that actually means. At this point, we don't know. And then haver, which is fire. So if you think of it in the Hebrew, to help you remember, it almost rhymes. It's hashor, habor, mave, have. It's a very, very nice way of remembering it. So those are the 4 primary categories. We discussed yesterday that by inference, it means that there must be subcategories. We discussed which subcategories in Gemara Shabbos pose a similarity to the primary categories, and in Tumas, how they are dissimilar, the subcategories in the main category. And we used these 2 extreme examples in other parts of the Gemara to show. And it ended off the daf yesterday with Rav Papa saying, in Bava Kama, there are some cases where the Tordos, the subcategories are different to the Avos, the primary categories, and some cases where they are different. And what we're going to do in the upcoming dafim is actually see where they're similar and where they're different. So that's a summary of yesterday. Does everybody understand that before we proceed on?
Yes, I understand it.
Great. Okay, Michael. Good. All right. So let me just turn off my phone so there are no disturbances because it always works. What we're going to do now is we're going to concentrate on the category first of ox. And ox in itself and all the other main categories have a myriad of rules, as well as primary categories within themselves and subcategories within themselves. So if we have a look and we study ox and only ox, what we're going to determine now is what ox comprises of. So the first thing of it is Gavin did a wonderful chart, which I'm going to open up and I'm going to share the screen. And it's just going to give you a quick overview. Since Barry's probably going to listen to the audio, what we're going to do is also do a description, and I'm going to email the chart that Gavin so brilliantly did. So Gavin, thank you very, very much for that.
Thank you. It didn't take me too long. Damon's just making it sound phenomenal.
No, you know what, Gavin? It took work, and I tell you something. If it adds clarity, I'm grateful. I'm sure everybody is.
Pleasure. And I think it's very useful. I think it's a great graph, but it didn't take hours and hours.
Let me just move this because I'm seeing. Are you just seeing? You just seeing the background of my screen? You're not seeing the 4 of you. Is that correct?
What we're seeing at the moment is the graph.
And
fantastic.
And you on the side, yeah.
Perfect.
Now we need to get rid of you, otherwise it cuts off the graph.
No, man.
Yeah. Do you get?
You can just minimize the people on the side, and then you can see the whole graph.
Yeah.
So you can kindly minimize us. That's certainly not a problem. What I'm actually suggesting is that we just look at the graph for a sec, and if you can see on the top where you see Hashor, the ox, then you've got Habor, which is the pit, ha, meaning the, and Bor is pit. You can think of it like, Arthur thought of a good association, you're boring a pit, B-O-R-E. In other words, you're digging a pit. It's a nice way to remember. Maver, we said that the Gemara will discuss, and Haver, which rhymes with Maver almost, is fire. We said it's not Aish because it's not a flame. It's a proper demolishing fire. Now, all we're going to do at this point is deal with the chart of the primary categories of ox. And those primary categories, from what we can see on the chart, is as follows. You've got what you call Keren, Shane, and Regel. In the Gemara, it's always referred to as the Hebrew terms, or the Aramaic terms. And the reason why we're going to refer to them in the Hebrew is because it's a term that we're going to use over and over again. There are 3 books of Bava Kama within the Schottenstein, and there's very, very little vocab. Once we've learned a couple of the words, you'll be able to understand it well. And when you understand it well, in years from now, when somebody mentions it, it'll automatically jog. So there's certain underlying premise of each of the main primary categories of ox. We're going to go through them, and then we're going to go through the subcategories. Now, this is going to be, to a certain extent, a little bit out of order. The simple reason is that there's so much detail that the Gemara does go off on a tangent, at which we can't avoid totally, because what the Gemara does is I'm going to discuss the 3 issues in brief of what each of those primary categories are, but the Gemara is very strict in terms of scriptural sourcing, because otherwise you can say these descriptions are meaningless. The premise upon learning all of this is that the Torah was given to us by Moshe, that came directly from Hashem. All of this is God-given. So you have to keep that in mind, that these sources, it's not just sources from a law book, they're sources from Hashem, so to speak. And that's why we have to take them very seriously. So let's just discuss ox. The 3 primary categories, we're going to go into the first one. The first one is Keren. Now, Keren literally means horn. And we're going to bring some biblical resources. Now, what the essence of horn is goring. So goring is when, for example, you have an ox in Madrid. I don't know if you know, once a year they've got the Madrid, where the Madrid ox run, where they let these oxes loose in the street. And if you run like, I wouldn't call it Bruce Fordyce, he's a long distance runner, but if you can run like the speed of the wind, you're not going to get tonked by the horn. If you're having a bit of a slow day, you're going to get impaled by the horn. So goring itself can create death or injury. And what happens in that particular case is that falls under a particular category where the animal intends to damage. So what we're going to determine is all the subcategories of goring are going to have that theme in common. In other words, an animal can use more than just a horn to create intentional damage. Can use other parts of its body as well. Art, I think I'm hearing the background of your kids. Can you mute? Thanks, man. Then we're going to be dealing with a case called Shane. And Shane literally means tooth. And tooth implies, what does tooth imply? Arth, what do you think it implies? You're on mute. I can just see your mouth moving like a Charlie Chaplin movie.
Okay, I'm assuming tooth can be 2 different things. One for eating.
Yeah.
And one for biting.
Excellent. Guys, I think you did considerably well. That's excellent. So the tooth we refer to as Shane is purely for physical gratification, meaning eating. That's exactly it. So that's what a tooth is in regards to Shane. Now we're dealing with a foot, literally a regel. And what we're saying is that the damage unique to regel is, firstly, it's the most common. The reason it's the most common is not that animals don't gore from time to time or they don't eat, but an animal cannot go from point A to B without walking. So therefore, it's more common even than eating, and it's the way the animal naturally moves. Within the subcategories of regel, which literally means foot, is the way a normal movement of an animal can cause damage. So conceptually, the tordos are the same as the avos, it would seem. We're going to go into it in more detail. In terms of Shane, which is, again, physical gratification, such as eating, the toldos, the subcategories of the main category, are also involved with ensuring that the animal damages through its own physical gratification or pleasure. Gavin's chart helps a lot. Marco, does it make sense to you?
Perfect.
Okay, I know it makes sense to Gavin because the poor thing ended up having to spend a lot of time with us chatting with the charts. I'm sure this drilled into him. The only one I'm worried about a little bit is Barry because this is new to him and he hasn't attended. And I hope he actually ends up seeing the video. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to email him this particular chart so that if he listens to the audio, because he doesn't have to look at me, I'm no oil painting. I mean, I've often said I've got a face for radio and a voice for print, meaning I'm not that visual and I'm not that audio, but this is the medium we have. Okay, so now what it's going to do is the Gemara is going to go into the point of where is the scriptural source for Keren. It wants to derive where Keren is from, and it's at this point that the Gemara is going to start. Guys, just hang on for me 1 second. Just bringing my notes. Okay. What I'm going to do is, after I'm trying to get to a point where I can get rid of all the screens. Do I have to stop sharing in order to do it or not?
Sorry, Mike, you want to know about what screens you want to get rid of?
Am I on Team Viewer with you or not?
No, you're on Team Viewer.
Okay, because I'm seeing everybody's screen.
Okay, I'm going to pause the recording. I'm pausing the recording now. Okay, I'm recording now.
Sorry. Okay. So there, you don't need the chart at the moment. We will go through it in tomorrow's stuff in more detail. But the bottom line is there are three primary categories of ox in the Gemara. It's Keren, Shane, and Regel. Again, Keren has to do with intent to damage. Anything that the animal uses within its body with the intention of damaging another person or animal is known as Keren. Keren literally means horn. Then you have Shane. Shane literally means tooth. And anything that the animal does, its primary case in the mentioned in scriptural sources is eating. But anything that an animal does for physical gratification, like rubbing itself against the wall and the wall falls down, or the animal's rolling in the hay or soiling an object, or agriculture, means that you're responsible for that damage. So that goes under the category of physical gratification. And then your last case is regel. And regel is the way an animal naturally walks. And since walking is the most common way that an animal moves from A to B, anything that it does in that movement that damages you are responsible. And the tordos that we're going to see are other sort of normal movements that create damage with the other parts of the animal body. So each one of those is unique in those features, and there are different payments in different circumstances at which you pay and don't pay. And the upcoming Gemaras will go through it. Is everything clear in terms of Shane, Regel, and Keren for all of you before we go into the halachic discourse?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gav?
Yeah, perfect.
Michael, perfect. Great. Arthur, does that make sense for you? Because you're a bit more new at this one.
Yeah, it makes sense.
All right. So that's fine. So the first thing is that the Gemara always discusses the halachic source, and this is how it starts off. So it says, from where's the liability for damage done with the horn derived? For the rabbis taught in the Brisa, Nagicha refers to nothing other than striking with a horn, goring. So whenever you see that Brisa Nagicha, it means striking with a horn. Now, I just wanted to explain to you why the term Nagicha is used. You have a term with a horn that is known as pushing. You've got Nagifa and Nagicha. So the one has to do with pushing at close range, where you're sitting next to an animal and the animal just takes one look at you and knocks you over with its horn, and it can really intend to do damage. It's a little bit different to a goring process where the animal from a distance, I don't know if you've ever seen these movies where the ox scratches with its right leg 3 times and takes a running charge. Now, when that hits you, it's the equivalent of a bucky hitting you at 120 Ks with 2 pointed objects. The rate of survival there is not great. But they both intend to damage. So there is a slight difference there in the word, but they both mean horn. So it's unusual because generally the scriptural source is mentioned first, but in this case, the Gemara mentions the Brisa. Okay? As it states, I'm just going to read you the Brisa. Okay? So the Brisa talks of a case. It's actually in King the first of Malachi in Kings in 22:11. So Gavin and I learned this in Sanhedrin. So there was Yosafat. So he was a righteous king of Yehuda, and what happens at that point in the Tanakh? There were a split between the tribes of Israel. And Achav was a particular wicked king. We learned in Sanhedrin that he doesn't get a portion of Olam Haba. And he was responsible for creating a lot of drama, including idol worshippers, etc., etc. But what happened was, in order for him to get stronger, he wanted to join up with Yosafat because the king of Yehuda had 10 tribes under him, and there were another 2 tribes that were separate, and they wanted to join together in order to be a much stronger alliance against Aram. Now, Yosafat wasn't trusting Achav a lot because he didn't have a great track record. So Achav said to him that he will gather 400 Novim, false prophets, of which obviously Yosafat didn't know that they were false prophets. And then you had Chizkiyahu, who said that all of these prophets were false. Now, these prophets that were false weren't random prophets. They're prophets that were corrupted by Achav. And Yosafat was actually tricked into this. So how it worked was as follows, is one of the prophets actually, he created what you call horns of iron and announced to Achav and Yosafat, with these you shall gore Aram into submission. So let me just set the scene here. Very often, things were done in those times, like more Shakespeare. There was a lot of drama. You didn't have TV, etc. So they were setting the scene, and they were emotionally trying to convince Yosafat that this was good, and we're going to submit the enemy, etc. And what he wore was a helmet with horns. I don't know if you've ever seen the old Vikings. Have you seen that they used to wear these horns?
Yes.
Yeah.
So they wore a metal cap and a horn. I don't know if Marco, have you seen it?
Asterix. If you haven't read Asterix, then you...
That's it. It's exactly Asterix. And in fact, it was the same time period. So it was common to wear that in battle. So that's what they were wearing. So the term that you've got to bear in mind here is, why is that an example used of a horn? Surely there's a better reference. There's a scriptural reference in the Chumash, because we always derive halacha from the Chumash. So then it's going to bring a second example. And the example is in Exodus 21:28. And it basically reads, if an ox shall perform the gicha upon a man or a woman, and the person dies, etc. Okay? So there you see another source, and then there's a third source that's brought, and we can bring a reason as to why all 3 sources are brought. Okay? So the last source is in Deuteronomy 33:17, and what this whole thing in Deuteronomy covers is it covers the fact. Sorry, it covers the fact that kings will descend from Yosef. Okay. So, bottom line, just to create a very big summary, that we always only can derive halacha from the Chumash. Always. So, it's saying then, why bring the brises? Why bring the other two examples? Because the other two examples are allowed simply because they're giving contextual relevance. In other words, they're showing two other cases where horns are brought forward, and that the concept of goring is brought forward. The one is that what a horn means, and the other one is the concept of goring and the fact that they are linked. And the Gemara wants to bring, why don't they just bring the source in Exodus? What is the other reason? And the reason being is as follows, is that there is a slight difference in term between Nagifa and Nagicha. So the one refers to, how do I put this in a simple way? The one refers to a horn that's detached, meaning that it's a horn that's detached. The guy that was wearing the horn, Sidkiya ben Kanai, that was fashioned horn for himself of iron and said, let's go to war. Those horns are not attached. So if we just use that as a source, it couldn't prove that the horn that was in fact attached on an animal is counted as damaged. Because what we're going to learn is we're going to learn a principle of tam and muad. And before the Gemara knows that tam and muad refers to a habitual gora and a tame animal, it just merely discusses the fact that a tam makes half payment and that a muad makes full payment. So initially when you read this, you think that perhaps it's making half payment in a case where the horn is not attached from the scriptural source, because it's a very unusual way that the animal would damage. And the only way I can describe this is we once had an Alsatian that ran past me and had a dog bone in its mouth and ended up cutting my hand with a sharp object. So what they're saying is an animal can have things on its person, like another horn and gore, and you would think because this is so unusual, that is resulting in the tam, the half damage. When in fact later we learn there's a different reason. Now the reason you learn the other verses is because you want to say that if a horn is on the animal permanently, in that case you're obligated to the damage. Where the animal has got a horn not on it, like it's got protective armor, you damaged in full with regards to that as well. And the fact of it is, Keren is a primary damager. It's not a subcategory of damage. So we can't turn around in that case and say there's less of a payment because it's a subcategory. The only other point that they want to bring with Nagicha and Nagifa, etc., is the fact that there are different payments with regards to a man and an animal. So, for example, if a animal gores once or twice or three times, it's known over a period, call it of a lifetime, it's known as a tame animal because it's unusual to gore. And what happens is if an animal gores more than 3 times, it's known as muad, which is a habitual gorer. Now, a habitual gorer means that an animal, muad technically means warned. The owner has to be warned that this animal is very dangerous. And because the animal is very dangerous, there are full payments required. When an animal is deemed to be tame and it's got an unusual incident of damaging, the law is very lenient against the owner and allows him to pay from half damages of the gufa of the animal instead of full damages from the choice property. So we're going to go into what this means. But the reason why we bring the Nagifa and Nagicha here as well is that if an animal is a habitual gorer that has gored other animals more than 3 times, if it gores a man on the 4th time, it's considered, according to Rashi, who explains the Gemara, that in fact you pay the half damages because the animal is considered tame against goring a person. And the reason why the Gemara brings this is that, firstly, a human being has got more intelligence than another animal and can see a danger coming, whereas animals are generally a little bit more unaware and stupid. The other reason that Rashi brings from the Gemara is that animals do not have hashgacha pratis or divine protection, whereas each Jew, or even a human being for that matter, has got much more divine protection because they interplay in a much more complex way in the world. So you have to have a lot of muzzle in order to kill a person, because it's not a low level of protection. The Malachim are watching each individual and protecting each individual. So that's what it wants to bring, is that the reason for the term differences is that the payments on a habitual gorer of an animal damaging another animal refer to a tame animal when attacking a human. But obviously, if it attacks a human 3 times, on the 4th time, when an animal is already muad, which is fully responsible and a habitual damager and gorer, it will then pay full damages for an animal. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I do have a question.
Please ask.
Why do they allow an animal to become mu'ad if it's an animal versus an animal, and why does it allow it to become mu'ad if it goes a human being 3 times? Why don't they put the animal to death before it even gets to that stage?
Okay, so that is an excellent question. That's going to be discussed in Gemara 19a. We at the moment on 2b. So that will be discussed as to the consequence and the process of the warning, and when an animal is put to death and how it's put to death, and in fact, how it can get to the stage of muad in any event of that level of intensity, and what the court process is. So that's an excellent question, and it will be addressed. For now, all I want you to realize is that there are differences between paying for a tame animal that versus a animal that is a habitual gorer and has been and the owner has been warned by the courts. And there is a different payment whether it damages a man or another animal. That's all I want you to understand. Is that part clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So the scriptural sources, I know that can be a little bit seem tedious, but unless you have those sort of scriptural sources, it's difficult to come to any conclusion on what a tam is and a muad is. And yeah, that's it. I think we've hit everything for today. And just know that halacha can only be derived from the Chumash, and any other word usage is merely terminology. They're proving terminology. They're not determining monetary payments from Isaiah or kings, etc. Only terminology to show the word occurs in more than one place. But halacha from the Chumash only. And I want to thank you guys. We kept the session relatively short, and we're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow.
100%.
Fantastic. Perfect.
Pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Ciao.
Thanks. See you tomorrow. Cheers.
Ciao.
Cheers.